Hey everyone, while uploading this video, YouTube told me that there are literally 0 people subscribed to this channel. So if you like what you see, go and subscribe to get notified of future content. It only takes a second and you can always unsubscribe later. Hello! Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that this new board game channel only decided to feature Pendulum, Stonemeier's newest and perhaps overhyped game, because he thought that maybe, just maybe, it would help break through that thick, juicy foam that is the YouTube algorithm. Well, I want to tell you that if you thought that, you'd be absolutely correct. Yeah, that's why I'm doing it. But also I'm here to tell you that maybe Pendulum, despite all of its flaws, is actually a pretty good and fun game. But before we get into it, I first kind of want to say what my board game channel is kind of about. Now, instead of telling you whether the game is good or bad or how to play the game or anything like that, I only focus on one thing: feelings. Specifically how a board game tries to make players feel. And if that feeling, whether it be good or bad, makes a player, in this case me, want to go back to the board game or just leave it behind entirely. Now you could say that is good or bad, but I'm hoping by focusing just on the feelings instead of the mechanics and this is what you're doing and what all that kind of stuff, I hope you can get a better understanding of if this board game is right for you. So with that, let's get to Pendulum. Now, to be completely and utterly honest, Pendulum is not a complex game. Basically, throughout the game, you'll be placing workers on action spaces that will then give you resources. Then you can place a worker on another action spot to turn those resources into victory points, which are tracked specifically on your player board with these 4 different victory point tracks. Whoever has the most at the end wins. Pretty standard stuff. In fact, I'll say that this is so simplistic that just based on that description alone, and with that being the majority of the game, Pendulum is probably the most simple resource management game that there is. Now, honestly, there are more complex things. For example, you have this hand of cards, so when do you play those cards? You also get these that can build up your engine, so that way when you take a location, maybe you get more resources than just the base 1 or 2 or whatever it may be. And then also after every round, you'll be picking new cards that either give you an instant benefit or adds to your hand of cards. So like I said, there's a little bit more going on than just resources, victory points, but what it boils down to is basically just that. But if that's all the game is, why would you want to play a game that has absolutely no challenge at all? Well, I'm glad you asked. The reason why is because of these right here, sand timers. Because now instead of just simply placing a worker on a location, now you're locking that worker for either 45 seconds, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. So now it is not only about managing the resources that you receive and turn into victory points, it is about strategically placing them in such a way so that you can optimize the time that it takes to do those actions. Because at the start of the game, you only start with 2 workers, which honestly 2 workers isn't that hard to manage because probably they're both locked at the moment. So you're waiting for the timers to run down. One timer flips, okay, it becomes unlocked. You can move it. And then you're waiting some more. But near the end of the game, you might have up to 4 workers. So suddenly, workers are becoming locked and unlocked at every moment. You gotta remember to take actions. So suddenly, this simple game of just waiting for a worker to become unlocked becomes quite complex because suddenly, you might forget about a worker. That happened to me on more occasions than I'd like to admit. Because honestly, you're so focused on what you're trying to do that you may see a worker down a location and not realize that it is time for him to take his action. So it's not just a simple resource management game, now it is a complex time management game as well. So what kind of feelings does Pendulum attempt to make you feel? Well, according to the lore on the front of the rulebook, it's something to do with the Time Lord dying and now you have to try to amass power and money and everything else to become the new Time Lord. But honestly, none of that matters because what's happening is you're placing a worker, you're getting cubes, you're turning those cubes into victory points. It is a completely themeless game, so even though the theme might attempt to give feelings, it does not do that in the slightest. Instead, where the feelings do exist are actually in these 3 sand timers. You see, when I was kind of giving the explanation about placing the workers in these sand timers and the resource management, I tried to kind of invoke the feeling that you get when you're playing this game. Because not only are you almost always taking an action, whether it be on a location or cards in your hand or something like that, you're almost always thinking about what to do next. Because Pendulum can be frantic, especially when the sand timer flips and everybody starts reaching over the table in order to take actions, move their worker someplace else, and then play cards in order to optimize as many seconds as they can. That is definitely frantic. But there are moments in the game where all the sand timers are still running, and you get a chance to sit back and think and plan out your next few steps. And you're trying to think you have X, Y, and Z amount of time roughly on all three of these sand timers. So what can you do with this knowledge to then optimize your moves for the next turn? And as soon as you have that idea in your head, a sand timer ends and somebody flips it, and all of a sudden, it's frantic again. So yes, it can be very, very frantic, but it's also very, very thinky. And those two things combined are what create the feeling of what Pendulum is attempting, and I feel succeeds to give. Now, I don't really know if thinky frantic is really a feeling per se, but I honestly have no way else to describe it. Yes, there are absolutely moments where your heart is just thumping. It is going a million miles a second. We are trying to make sure you take all the actions you can before the sand timers run out. But then there are those other moments when you're just sitting back and you're thinking. You're thinking about, okay, I have 4 workers. I have 2 workers that I can place. Where can I place these 2? Oh, I have this card. I want to play this card so I can get this resource. I want to do this to unlock this worker to then move it to someplace else. Those are the moments where the franticness kind of dies down and the thinkiness ramps up. And that is where Pendulum thrives. No other game that I've seen has been able to do that. And with that, I kind of want to address the fact that this game can be played with a timer track, in which case you're not technically looking at the sand timers. I guess they still move locations, but you're not actually running sand through them. And you can actually look ahead and determine your turn. Now, what I do recommend using this for maybe a round or 2 in a learning game, I would not at all recommend it in use for experienced players. Now, a top 10 game for me is Tzolk'in. I absolutely love it. It's the one with the gears, and you're moving along, and the farther you get, the better the reward is. I absolutely love that game, and I was thinking that maybe the time track would give Pendulum a Tzolk'in-like feel. But in all honesty, because the base game of just placing workers, getting resources, turning resources into victory points is so bland and kind of dumbed down, it's not really enjoyable. Like I said, good for a learning game, but I would not recommend it. Because where the game thrives is right here in these 3 sand timers. If it wasn't for those, Pendulum is a nothing game. This makes the game. So yeah, all the criticisms of Pendulum valid, 100%. I completely, honestly agree with many of the criticisms that people have presented. Is it frantic? Yes. Is someone who's better at being fast and being able to think quickly going to win at this game? Absolutely. Is it completely themeless? Yes. Are the plastic resources maybe not the best? Yeah. But with all of that, do I enjoy it? Definitely. Now, with me saying that, though, I will say that I am a pretty big fan of Stonemaier Games. And because of that, I rate many of them pretty highly. And Pendulum is probably the bottom of that list. Now, that being said, the bottom of a list of a number of fantastic games is not bad. It's just not as high as those. So even though this is near the bottom of Stonemaier Games, it's still a pretty good game. Anyways, everybody, thank you for watching. I've been Ian, and these have been my bored feelings on Pendulum. So have you played it, or are you just completely and utterly turned off by the real-time aspect? Leave your own feelings in the comments below, and now go experience many bored feelings.